The cantina on Kepler 442b was the kind of place where civilized folks never ventured. Smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the smell of alien alcohol and something that might have been blood. This wasn't a bar for traders or diplomats. This was where the galaxy's killers came to drink. In one corner, a group of Vectory mercenaries sharpened their razor claws on metal tables, leaving deep gouges in the surface. Their red eyes glowed in the dim light as they spoke in hushed tones about their latest kills. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Each one had personally ended dozens of lives across multiple star systems. Near the bar, 3 Zephyrian Mindhunters sat perfectly still, their pale blue skin almost translucent. They didn't need to speak aloud. Their telepathic abilities let them share thoughts directly, and those thoughts usually involved the best ways to drive their victims insane before finishing them off. Other patrons gave them plenty of space. Nobody wanted a Mindhunter poking around in their head. The Kron death dealers occupied the back booths, their bodies more machine than flesh after decades of cybernetic upgrades. Chrome limbs caught the flickering light as they counted credits and planned their next jobs. Their reputation was simple. Point them at a target, and that target would be dead within a week. No exceptions. Assassins from a dozen other species filled the remaining seats. Some had natural camouflage that made them nearly invisible. Others possessed strength that could crush steel with their bare hands. A few had evolved on worlds so hostile that they could survive in the vacuum of space. All of them had one thing in common. They killed for money, and they were very good at it. This was their world, their sanctuary. Here, they could speak freely about the jobs that would horrify normal citizens across the galaxy. They traded tips on weapons, shared information about security systems, and boasted about their most challenging kills. So when a young fool suggested taking a contract against human special operations forces, the reaction was immediate and shocking. Every conversation stopped. Glasses froze halfway to lips. The constant background noise of clicking claws and whirring mechanical parts went silent. Even the Mindhunters looked surprised, their usual calm expressions cracking for just a moment. Jake watched this happen with growing confusion. He was young for a bounty hunter, barely past the species coming-of-age ceremonies, but had already made a name for himself in the Outer Rim territories. His blue scales marked him as an Altarian, a race known for their hunting instincts and predatory skills. His people had evolved from pack hunters on a harsh world, and those instincts served him well in his chosen profession. But right now, those same instincts were telling him something was very wrong. The silence stretched on, becoming uncomfortable. Jake could see fear in the eyes of beings who should know no fear. These were creatures who would stare down planetary defense forces without blinking. He'd seen some of them walk away from explosions that should have vaporized them. Yet the mere mention of humans had turned them into nervous children. Jake's confusion turned to irritation. He stood up from his table, his translator implant automatically switching to standard Galactic, so everyone could understand him. His voice carried clearly through the silent cantina. "What's wrong with you all?" he demanded, gesturing at the room full of frozen killers. "We're talking about humans here. They're the most ordinary species in the galaxy." He began pacing, his frustration growing with each word. "Think about it. They have no claws to tear through armor. Their skin is soft and tears easily. They can't read minds or turn invisible. They're not even particularly strong or fast compared to most of us." Jake spread his arms wide, appealing to what he thought was logic. Half the species in this room could kill a human with one hand tied behind their back. So why does everyone look like they've seen a ghost? The silence continued. If anything, it got heavier. Some of the patrons had started shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few were even looking toward the exits, as if Jake's words had somehow put them all in danger. One grizzled Vectory veteran, his hide covered in scars from 100 battles, slowly shook his massive head. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "Kid, you have no idea what you're talking about." But before Jake could respond, another patron quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation towards safer topics like planetary sieges and orbital bombardments. The normal noise of the cantina gradually returned, but Jake noticed that several beings had quietly left. The mood had shifted, and it wouldn't return to normal for hours. Jake sat back down, his mind racing. He'd stumbled onto something important, something that the galaxy's most dangerous predators didn't want to discuss. His curiosity, already dangerous for someone in his line of work, was now burning like a star going supernova. He was going to find out what made humans so special, even if it killed him. Jake waited until most of the cantina had emptied out before making his move. The alcohol had loosened tongues, and the late hour meant only the serious drinkers remained. He spotted his target, nursing a drink in the corner booth, alone as always. Rex was a legend among the Vectory. His massive frame bore the scars of countless battles, each mark telling a story of survival against impossible odds. His hide, once a brilliant crimson, had faded to a dull rust color with age, but his yellow eyes still burned with the intensity of a born predator. Those eyes had been the last thing over 300 beings had ever seen. The old assassin didn't look up when Jake approached. He simply gestured to the empty seat across from him with one massive claw. Jake slid into the booth, trying not to seem too eager despite his burning curiosity. Rex took a long drink from his glass before speaking. His voice sounded like gravel being crushed underfoot, damaged by years of breathing recycled air on military transports and space stations. "Listen, kid," Rex began, still not meeting Jake's eyes. "I've been doing this work since before your species invented faster-than-light travel. In all that time, I've learned one simple rule that's kept me alive when smarter and stronger hunters have died." He finally looked up, fixing Jake with a stare that had intimidated warlords across 40 star systems. "You can hunt anyone in this galaxy. Crime lords who control entire sectors. Rebel leaders with armies at their backs. Corrupt politicians with unlimited resources. Hell, you can even hunt other assassins if you're good enough." Rex leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the small table. "But there's one target you never, ever take a contract on. Human Special Operations Forces. That's not just good advice, kid. That's survival." Jake felt his scale brow furrow in confusion. "But they're just soldiers. Every species has elite military units. What makes humans different?" Rex's laugh was bitter and cold. "That's what everyone thinks at first. They see humans as soft targets. No natural weapons, no enhanced senses, no special abilities. Just basic biology wrapped in fancy equipment." The old killer took another drink, his claws clicking nervously against the glass. Jake had never seen Rex nervous about anything. The sound was unsettling. "But here's what you don't understand," Rex continued. "When you kill a regular soldier, their unit mourns them and moves on. When you kill a politician, someone else takes their place. When you kill a crime lord, their organization might even thank you for removing a problem." Rex's eyes grew distant, as if he was remembering something he'd rather forget. "But when you kill a human special ops soldier, something different happens. It becomes personal, not just for their unit, but for their entire military structure. They don't just want justice. They want revenge." Jake leaned forward, drawn in despite his skepticism. "Revenge how?" "Your whole world starts falling apart," Rex said quietly. "Suppliers you've worked with for years suddenly stop taking your calls. Safe houses that have protected you for decades get raided by local authorities. Information brokers who used to give you the best intel start feeding you lies." The old assassin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Your own crew starts looking at you sideways, wondering what you did to bring that kind of heat down on everyone. Friends become enemies. Allies disappear. Everything you've built over years of careful work crumbles in weeks." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but he pressed on. "That sounds like propaganda. Urban legends to keep people from taking those contracts." Rex shook his massive head slowly. "I wish it was, kid. I really do. But I've seen it happen too many times to count. The Crimson Fleet used to be the most feared pirate organization in the Outer Rim. 500 ships, thousands of fighters, enough firepower to level planets." He paused, staring into his drink as if seeing ghosts. "They made the mistake of capturing a human special forces team about 10 years ago. Thought they could ransom them back to Earth Command for a massive payday. What happened?" Jake found himself asking. though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "The Crimson Fleet doesn't exist anymore," Rex said simply. "Oh!" The humans never attacked him directly. Too smart for that. Instead, they started feeding information to the fleet's enemies. Rival pirate groups suddenly knew exactly where to hit them. Trade routes got leaked to planetary defense forces. Supply caches were discovered by authorities. Rex's claws were clicking faster now, a nervous habit Jake had never seen before. Within 6 months, the fleet was fighting a dozen different wars they couldn't win. Their allies turned on them. Their own captains started betraying each other for bounties. By the end, there was nothing left but wreckage and stories. Jake felt his mouth go dry. And the human soldiers? "Released unharmed after the first month," Rex replied. The fleet leader begged Earth Command to take them back, promised to never touch another human again. But it was too late. The wheels were already in motion. The cantina seemed quieter now, as if the very walls were listening to Rex's words. Jake glanced around nervously, half expecting human soldiers to emerge from the shadows. "I've heard other stories," Rex continued. "Entire mercenary companies that just vanished overnight. Professional killers who went after human targets and were never seen again. Space stations found completely empty, with only messages carved into the walls. Messages in perfect standard galactic that said things like, 'You should have chosen a different target.'" Rex finished his drink and stood up, his massive frame towering over Jake. "Whatever they're paying you for this job, kid, it's not worth it. Trust me on this. Find another target. There are plenty of beings in this galaxy who deserve killing, and most of them won't bring down the wrath of Earth Command on your head." As the old assassin walked away, Jake sat alone in the booth, his mind racing. Everything he thought he knew about the galaxy's power structure was suddenly in question. If beings like Rex were afraid of humans, maybe there was more to the species than met the eye. But Jake was young, and pride often outweighs wisdom in the young. The warning had been given, but whether it would be heeded remained to be seen. Jake stared at the contract details on his data pad for the 100th time. The numbers were incredible. More credits than he'd made in the past 5 years combined. Enough to buy his own ship. Maybe even retire to one of those peaceful colony worlds where nobody asks questions about your past. Rex's warnings echoed in his mind, but pride whispered louder. He was Altarian. His people had been apex predators for millions of years. Evolution had crafted him into the perfect hunter, with senses that could track prey across continents and natural camouflage that made him nearly invisible. How dangerous could 3 humans really be? The job seemed straightforward enough. A 3-person human special operations team was conducting reconnaissance on New Aberdeen, a remote mining colony in the outer territories. The client wanted them eliminated quietly, no questions asked. Jake had handled much harder targets with worse odds. His ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Aberdeen system, engines running cold to avoid detection. The mining colony was a typical corporate operation. Massive ore extractors, prefab housing blocks, and industrial facilities scattered across a barren landscape. Perfect hunting ground for someone with his skills. Jake spent the first day studying the colony's layout from orbit, mapping patrol routes, and identifying potential hiding spots. His enhanced vision could pick out details that would be invisible to human eyes, even through the atmospheric haze that hung over the industrial complex. On the second day, he landed his ship in a canyon 20 kilometers from the main colony and began his approach on foot. His natural camouflage shifted to match the rocky terrain, making him nearly impossible to spot even with advanced sensors. This was what Altarians were born for. The humans had established their base of operations in the colony's eastern sector, using the maze of mining equipment and storage facilities as cover. Jake could smell them before he saw them. Human scent was distinctive, clean, artificial, mixed with the metallic tang of their equipment. His prey had no idea a predator was closing in. For 6 days, Jake shadowed the human team through the industrial complex. He watched them conduct their reconnaissance, noting their patterns and routines. They moved with military precision, but they seemed completely unaware of his presence. His confidence grew with each passing hour. The humans appeared to be mapping the colony's defenses and recording equipment manifests. Standard intelligence gathering. They worked in shifts, never leaving their temporary base unguarded, but Jake had identified weaknesses in their security. These weren't the superhuman warriors Rex had described. They were just ordinary soldiers doing ordinary work. By the sixth day, Jake had memorized every detail of their operation. Staff Sergeant Charlotte Reed handled communications and mission planning. Technical Sergeant Brian Walsh managed their equipment and electronic surveillance. Corporal Tommy Grant served as their sniper and perimeter guard. 3 humans with standard military training and basic weapons. Jake's hunting instincts told him the moment was perfect. The humans had moved into an abandoned or processing facility to avoid a dust storm that was rolling across the colony. The massive building provided excellent cover for an approach, and the storm would mask any sounds he made. He checked his plasma rifle one final time. The weapon was military grade, acquired from a defeated opponent years ago. 1 shot would be enough to take down the first target. His natural speed would let him eliminate the other 2 before they could react. Jake activated his camouflage and began his final approach. The abandoned facility loomed ahead, its twisted metal framework creating perfect shadows for concealment. His enhanced hearing picked up the soft sounds of human voices from inside the building. They were discussing their mission, completely relaxed and off guard. Moving like liquid shadow, Jake positioned himself at the facility's main entrance. Through gaps in the metal sheeting, he could see the humans clustered around a portable workstation. They had their backs to him, focused on their data screens. It was almost too easy. Jake raised his rifle and took careful aim at Staff Sergeant Reed. His finger found the trigger, applying the first stage of pressure. 1 second to acquire the target, another to fire, then he'd pivot to the next human. Simple, clean, efficient. That's when he heard the soft metallic click directly behind his head. The sound froze his blood instantly. Jake knew that noise. Every predator in the galaxy knew it. The safety being released on a military sidearm, held steady and professional, close enough that he could feel the weapon's presence without seeing it. Jake Morrison, Altarian bounty hunter, registered out of Proxima Station. A calm female voice said in perfect standard galactic. The accent was distinctly human, but there was no fear or uncertainty in it. Just cold, professional competence. Jake's enhanced hearing caught more details that made his situation clear. Multiple heartbeats behind him. At least 3 humans, positioned to cover all his escape routes. How had they gotten behind him without triggering his enhanced senses? The voice continued with casual precision. Born on Altair Prime 26 standard years ago. Trained by the Korthak hunting guilds. 17 confirmed kills across 9 star systems. Currently wanted by the Centauri Syndicate for breach of contract after you failed to eliminate that arms dealer on Kepler Station. Jake's mind raced. They knew everything about him, not just his name and species, but details that weren't in any public database. Information that should have been impossible for random soldiers to access. "You knew," he whispered, his weapon suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. "We knew the moment your ship entered the system," came the reply. Staff Sergeant Charlotte Reed stepped into view, her sidearm trained on him with unwavering precision. Her blue eyes held no anger, no excitement, just a calm focus, a professional doing her job. Behind her, Technical Sergeant Brian Walsh and Corporal Tommy Grant emerged from concealment positions Jake hadn't even noticed. They moved with practiced coordination, covering angles and blocking escape routes with the fluid efficiency of a team that had worked together for years. Jake's plasma rifle clattered to ground as the full scope of his failure became clear. The humans he'd been stalking for 6 days hadn't been unaware of his presence. They'd been herding him, guiding his movements, letting him think he was a hunter while they prepared their trap. "Welcome to your education, Jake," Reed said, her smile holding no warmth at all. "Class is now in session." Jake expected to feel the burn of plasma fire or the sharp pain of a blade. Instead, he felt something wrap around his wrist that looked like simple metal bands, but immediately drained all the strength from his body. His enhanced Altarian muscles, capable of crushing steel, suddenly felt as weak as a newborn's. "Neural dampeners," Staff Sergeant Charlotte Reed explained matter-of-factly as she checked the restraints. "Disrupts the electrical signals between your brain and your muscle fibers. Don't worry, it's temporary. Probably. Jake tried to struggle, but his body wouldn't obey his commands. The humans lifted him easily, carrying him through corridors he hadn't even known existed. They moved through what looked like solid rock walls that turned out to be sophisticated camouflage screens. Within minutes, they arrived at a facility that made Jake's head spin. It was massive, carved directly into the asteroid's core, filled with equipment that looked decades ahead of anything he'd seen before. Banks of computers hummed quietly, while holographic displays showed real-time data from across the colony. "This is our actual base of operations," Technical Sergeant Brian Walsh said as he activated various systems. "That little setup you found in the ore processing facility? That was bait. We've been operating out of this location for 3 weeks." Jake's mind reeled. He'd passed within meters of this place multiple times during his surveillance. His enhanced senses should have detected the energy signatures, the air circulation, the dozens of other signs that indicated a major installation. But he'd found nothing. Reed pulled up a chair and sat down across from him, a data pad in her hands. "This is standard operating procedure for us. When we capture an asset, we use them as both an intelligence source and an educational opportunity. Consider yourself lucky. Most people who come after us don't get the chance to learn from their mistakes." The data pad screen faced Jake, and he could see his own face staring back at him. But it wasn't just a basic identification file. This was his entire life history, detailed down to his childhood pets and his worst fears. Information that should have been impossible to gather. Jake Morrison, born Altair Prime. Standard calendar year 2387. Reed read aloud. Parents were mining technicians. Showed early aptitude for tracking and hunting. Entered the Korthak training program at age 16. Graduated with honors in stealth operations and long-range elimination techniques. She scrolled down through pages of data. First professional contract at age 20. Target was a corrupt labor organizer on Vega Station. Clean kill, no witnesses. 17 successful contracts since then, with only one failure, when the Centauri Syndicate job went sideways. Jake found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "How do you know all this?" "We know everything about everyone who might pose a threat to human interests," Corporal Tommy Grant said from his position at a control station. "Your species, your training methods, your psychological profiles, your favorite foods. Information is our most powerful weapon." Walsh activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. Jake watched in horror as it showed his exact movements over the past 6 days, traced out in glowing lines across a 3-dimensional map of the colony. "Every move you made was completely predictable," Walsh explained, highlighting specific routes Jake had taken. "Altarians hunt in very specific patterns. It's hardwired into your neural structure by millions of years of evolution. Your people always approach from downwind, always seek the highest observation point, always attempt to isolate the weakest target first." The display zoomed in on specific moments from Jake's stalking attempts. "Day 1. You circled our position 3 times, checking for escape routes and defensive positions. Day 2. You established an observation post exactly where our behavioral models predicted you would. Day 3. You began probing for weaknesses in our routine." Jake watched his week of careful surveillance play out like a choreographed dance. Every decision he'd made, every clever trick he'd employed, every moment where he'd felt like a skilled predator had been anticipated and planned for. "You thought you were hunting us," Grant said, pulling up surveillance footage that showed Jake creeping through the industrial complex. "But we were hurting you. Every position you took, every route you chose, we guided you there with subtle adjustments to our patrol patterns and activity schedules." The footage showed Jake moving through what he thought were perfect concealment positions, completely unaware that human sensors were tracking his every step. Worse, it showed the humans deliberately exposing fake vulnerabilities in their security, drawing him exactly where they wanted him to be. Reed leaned forward, her blue eyes intense and focused. "This is what you don't understand about humans, Jake. Other species in this galaxy rely on natural advantages. The Vecturi have their claws and armor. The Zephyrians have telepathy. The Kron have their cybernetic enhancements." She gestured at the holographic displays surrounding them. But humans learned something different during our evolution. We learned to think, to adapt, to study our enemies so thoroughly that we can predict their actions before they make them. Walsh brought up another screen showing detailed behavioral analysis charts. We've been studying Altarian hunting patterns for 40 years. We know how you move, how you think, what motivates you. Your species' greatest strength is also your greatest weakness. Our predictability, Jake said quietly, the full scope of his failure finally becoming clear. Exactly, Reed confirmed. You hunted us the way your instincts demanded, but we knew those instincts better than you did. While you were playing the role of apex predator, we were completing our actual reconnaissance mission and preparing to capture you. Grant pulled up the final piece of footage, showing Jake's approach to what he thought was the perfect ambush. You felt clever here, didn't you? Thought you found the ideal moment to strike. Jake nodded weakly, remembering the confidence he'd felt just hours before. You were standing exactly where we wanted you to stand, Walsh said, at precisely the time we wanted you there. Every element of that moment was crafted by us, for us. Reed stood up and walked to the main display, where Jake's complete tactical analysis was laid out in painful detail. You don't just train to kill, she said, echoing Jake's earlier realization. We train to win. And there's a very important difference between those two things. Jake stared at the screen, showing every mistake he'd made, every assumption that had led him into this trap. For the first time in his adult life, he felt like prey instead of predator. 3 days passed in a blur of pain, humiliation, and education. The humans didn't torture Jake in any traditional sense. They didn't need to. Instead, they systematically dismantled everything he thought he knew about being a predator in the galaxy. They showed him footage of other failed assassination attempts against human targets, recordings of legendary killers making the same mistakes he had made, detailed breakdowns of how human intelligence networks operated across dozens of star systems. By the end, Jake understood that he hadn't just failed a single mission. He had walked into a web that spanned half the known galaxy. When Staff Sergeant Charlotte Reed finally released him, Jake barely recognized his own equipment. His military-grade plasma rifle had been reduced to a pile of melted components. His advanced camouflage suit was now just scraps of burned fabric. Even his personal data pad, containing years of accumulated intelligence, had been wiped clean and reformatted. But the worst part was the message burned into his arm. The human medic had been surprisingly gentle while applying the brand, but the meaning behind it was anything but kind. 12 different languages, representing every major galactic power, all saying the same thing. We know who sent you. The Shadow Hegemony, Reed said as she watched Jake examine the fresh scar tissue. That's the name of the syndicate that hired you, though they probably didn't tell you their real name when they made the offer. Jake looked up sharply. The humans were right, of course. His contact had claimed to represent a legitimate corporate interest seeking to eliminate industrial saboteurs. The cover story had been convincing enough that Jake hadn't dug deeper into their background. Reed continued in the same calm, professional tone she'd used throughout his captivity. We know their organizational structure. 43 active members spread across 17 star systems. We know their primary income sources, which include slave trading, weapons smuggling, and industrial espionage. We know their financial networks, their safe houses, their family connections. She handed him a basic survival kit containing water, rations, and a simple medical scanner. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep him alive until he could find proper transportation. More importantly, Technical Sergeant Brian Walsh added from his position at the control station, we know their enemies. And over the next few months, those enemies are going to become much better informed about hegemony operations. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You're going to destroy them. We won't attack them directly, Reed corrected. That would be inefficient and messy. Instead, we'll just help their existing problems solve themselves. Their competitors will suddenly know exactly where to find unguarded shipments. Law enforcement will receive anonymous tips about their activities. Their own allies will start asking uncomfortable questions about missing funds and compromised operations. Corporal Tommy Grant looked up from his workstation with something that might have been pity in his eyes. Within 6 months, they'll be too busy fighting for survival to remember why they want us eliminated in the first place. Most of them probably won't survive the experience. Reed handed Jake a transport voucher, the kind of cheap, one-way ticket that refugees use when fleeing war zones. This will get you to the nearest neutral port. What happens after that is up to you. Jake took the voucher with trembling hands. His enhanced Altarian senses could still detect the neural dampener's effects, making him feel weak and vulnerable. Everything he had built over years of successful contracts was gone. His reputation, his equipment, his confidence, all reduced to nothing in the span of a week. "Why let me live?" he asked as he stumbled toward the hidden facility's exit. "You could have killed me and sent the same message." Grant's voice followed him down the corridor. "Because you're going to tell everyone what happened here. Consider it a public service announcement. The galaxy needs to understand what happens when someone comes after human special operations. The journey back to civilization was a nightmare of cheap transport ships and crowded refugee compartments. Jake's Altarian physiology made him stand out among the human passengers, and more than once he caught people staring at his branded arm. Word traveled fast in the spacer community. By the time he reached his destination, half the Outer Rim had heard rumors about the Altarian bounty hunter who had tried to kill human soldiers and lived to tell about it. The cantina on Kepler 442b looked exactly the same as when he left it weeks before, but Jake felt like a different person walking through its doors. The same dangerous beings occupied the same tables, drinking the same alien alcohol and planning the same violent jobs. But now Jake could see the fear lurking behind their predatory facades. His story spread through the criminal underworld like wildfire. Word passed from table to table, species to species, until every mercenary, assassin, and bounty hunter in the establishment had heard the details. Jake spoke in a quiet, matter-of-fact tone, describing his capture and education without embellishment or pride. As he talked, several patrons quietly finished their drinks and left. These were beings who had been considering taking contracts against human targets, suddenly realizing they might have already attracted the wrong kind of attention. Others pulled out communication devices, canceling jobs or warning associates about potential problems. Rex, the old Vectory assassin who tried to warn him, raised his glass in Jake's direction. It was a gesture of respect, acknowledging someone who had survived an encounter that few others had. The old Predator's yellow eyes held a mixture of relief and vindication. "Now you understand, kid," Rex said, his gravelly voice carrying clearly through the quieter cantina. "It's not that humans are the galaxy's toughest killers." Jake nodded slowly, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the scar on his arm. The branded message still burned sometimes, especially when he was stressed or tired. It served as a constant reminder of how completely he had been outmatched. "They're the smartest ones," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "And that's so much worse than being tough." The cantina gradually returned to its usual buzz of conversation, but Jake noticed that the topic of human special operations was notably absent from every table. Some lessons, once learned, were never forgotten. The galaxy's predators had received their message, and they understood it perfectly. From that day forward, contracts against human military personnel became almost impossible to fill. The galaxy's killers had found something they feared more than death itself: being outsmarted by their prey.